It happened on a Wednesday morning in Brookridge, Georgia, in the kind of gym that smelled like old hardwood and new ambition. The air buzzed with anticipation. Rows upon rows of students stood in polished shoes, starched white shirts, and maroon clip-on ties. It was the annual Junior Cadet Honor Assembly ceremony that celebrated integrity, service, and discipline. Parents filled the bleachers, clutching phones, dabbing eyes, smiling proudly. Teachers leaned against walls, monitoring the crowd, whispering between themselves. At the center of all this, standing straight with a shy smile and nervous hands, was 13-year-old Elijah Morales. Elijah was not the kind of kid who drew attention. He was quiet, respectful, always early to class, always the last to leave. The son of a Honduran immigrant who scrubbed hotel floors by night and packed school lunches by morning, Elijah carried his mother's grit in his spine and his country's flag in his dreams. He wanted to become a trauma surgeon in the military, to save lives on the battlefield instead of taking them. That morning, he was to be awarded a junior cadet certificate, a step forward on a long and disciplined journey. His tie was crooked, his shoes a little scuffed, but his heart was beating with a fierce kind of hope. The keynote speaker was Sheriff Buckley Drayton, a tall man with a square jaw, close-cropped hair, and a reputation for believing that respect must be earned through silence and submission. Medals gleamed on his chest. His boots thudded as he walked to the center of the gym floor. He took the microphone and began talking about obedience, chain of command, and something he called real American values. His voice was like gravel under pressure, sharp, cold, final. Most of the students nodded along, unsure whether they agreed or just afraid to seem defiant. Elijah, standing near the third row, fidgeted quietly. He reached up to adjust his collar, the one his mother had ironed twice that morning, and glanced down for a second. Just a second. Sheriff Drayton stopped mid-sentence. He looked straight at Elijah, eyes narrowing. The room stilled. The sheriff marched over. His boots echoed like war drums on the gym floor. Before Elijah could lift his head, before he could speak, before anyone could intervene, Drayton raised his hand and slapped the boy across the face. The sound cracked through the gym like a gunshot. Elijah didn't move. He didn't cry. His lip trembled, but his body held. His hand stayed at his sides. He stood, stunned, his face red and eyes wide, surrounded by classmates who watched in paralyzed disbelief. "You want to wear a uniform, son?" the sheriff barked. "Then start with respect." No one spoke. No teacher moved. The principal's face turned pale, but she remained frozen. In the bleachers, a gasp echoed as Elena Morales shot to her feet. She was already halfway down the steps when a teacher blocked her path. "Let's just wait," he whispered, holding out a hand. "It's being handled." Handled. Elijah was told, in front of everyone, to apologize. His voice barely a whisper, his cheeks still flushed, he said, "I didn't mean any disrespect." The ceremony moved on, except for one woman. At the very back of the gym, dressed in a deep navy military uniform, stood a silent observer. Her posture was straight, her gaze piercing. No one had introduced her. No one had noticed when she arrived. But she had noticed everything. Her name was Major Celeste Harding, an aide to the Secretary of Defense. She didn't move, didn't speak. She simply watched, until the gym doors opened again. A voice cut through the still air. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise to welcome the United States Secretary of Defense, Eleanor Rames." The sound of 100 folding chairs scraping back filled the room. Mouths dropped, eyes widened, phones lifted instinctively. Secretary Rames walked in, heels clicking on hardwood, every step deliberate, every gesture calm. She did not stop to shake hands. She did not glance at the sheriff. She walked straight to Elijah. She knelt to his level. Her voice, clear and resonant, carried across the room. "This young man wrote me a letter," she began. "A letter about service, about sacrifice, about dreaming beyond the circumstances you're born into. He wrote about becoming a military doctor, not to make money, not for power, but to serve. That letter reached my desk. It moved me. It reminded me of why we fight, why we lead." She turned to the stunned sheriff, still standing with arms stiff by his sides. And today, she said, I witnessed something else. I saw authority used without empathy, power wielded without cause, respect demanded without being earned. The gym was silent. Major Harding stepped forward and handed the secretary a small velvet box. Inside was a golden pin engraved with the seal of the Department of Defense. Secretary Rames placed it in Elijah's hand. This is the Defense Mentorship Commendation, she said. And as of this morning, we are founding a scholarship in your name for students like you. Students who lead with quiet strength, who rise above humiliation, and who represent the very best of what our future can be. Elijah looked down at the pin, then up at her, lips trembling now for a different reason. His mother crossed the gym floor, this time unimpeded, and wrapped him in her arms. She whispered something only he could hear. They see you now, Mijo. Sheriff Drayton stood like a monument stripped of its plaque. Wordlessly, he turned and left the gym. The school board would later announce a full review of its law enforcement partnerships, and the sheriff's future would be quietly debated behind closed doors. But none of that mattered in that moment, because Elijah Morales wasn't invisible anymore. He walked out of that gym with his head held high, his mother at his side, and a crowd of classmates who suddenly saw him for who he had always been. And sometimes, the most powerful change doesn't start with a revolution. It starts with a letter, a slap, and someone who refuses to look away. Rosa Morales hadn't cried in years. Life had taught her that tears didn't fix broken things, they only made it harder to keep moving. But that afternoon, she sat in the front seat of her rusted-out Nissan Sentra outside Brookridge Middle School, hands shaking on the steering wheel, and let the tears fall freely. Elijah was inside, with a guidance counselor who didn't know what to say and a school principal who said all the wrong things. They'd offered her coffee, apologies, explanations about unfortunate optics and emotional moments. But no one explained how a sheriff could strike a child in full view of teachers, students, and parents and walk away as if he'd dropped a pencil instead of a hand. Rosa wiped her eyes with the back of her palm and looked at the reflection of her son in the rearview mirror as he walked slowly toward the car, the golden pin from the Department of Defense still gripped tight in his small hand. He didn't say anything. He just opened the door, slid into the seat, and sat quietly beside her. "You hungry, Mijo?" she asked, her voice raw. He nodded. "Can we get tamales?" She smiled through the grief. "Sí, mi amor. We'll get tamales." They didn't speak of what happened. Not at first. Not during the drive. Not as they waited in line at the food truck. Not even when they sat on a park bench under the dying gold light of the late afternoon sun. But eventually, Elijah broke the silence. "Why did he do it?" he asked. Rosa didn't answer right away. She wanted to tell him about fear, about ignorance, about the history written on skin instead of paper. She wanted to explain how some men confuse silence with respect and obedience with virtue. But instead, she just said, because he saw what he wanted to see, not what was there. Elijah looked down at his tamale. "I didn't do anything." "I know," Rosa whispered. "He thought I didn't belong there." "You belong there more than anyone, baby." That night, when Elijah went to bed, Rosa took a deep breath and walked into the small storage closet beside her bedroom. Inside, among worn blankets and dusty shoeboxes, was a blue binder, her someday binder. It had copies of his birth certificate, school report cards, clippings from local newspapers when he won essay contests or science fairs. And now, she carefully tucked the golden pin inside, along with a printed copy of the letter he had sent to the Pentagon. The next morning, Brookridge was no longer quiet. News had spread fast. Videos posted by students and parents had gone viral. Headlines screamed across phones and laptops. Georgia Sheriff slaps honor student during ceremony. 13-year-old cadet honored by Defense Secretary after shocking incident. Discipline or abuse? Brookridge community demands answers. Local news trucks camped outside the school gates. National journalists began to call. People from all over the country flooded the school's social media pages with messages of support for Elijah. And the sheriff's department? It went radio silent. At school, Elijah's world had changed. Before the slap, He had been the kid most teachers liked, but never talked about. After, students whispered when he passed by. Some boys gave him respectful nods. Girls giggled awkwardly and told him they thought what happened was totally unfair. But Elijah didn't like the attention. Not all of it. He still helped clean up after class. Still walked his neighbor's dog for free. Still took notes for the kid with a broken arm. But a part of him felt heavier now, like the silence between who he was and who people thought he was had grown louder. The principal called for a school-wide assembly 3 days later. The mood in the gym was very different this time. No guest speakers. No med uniforms. Just parents, students, and faculty. She stood behind the same microphone Sheriff Drayton had used. "I want to begin by saying what happened last week was wrong," Principal Sims said. "It should never have happened, and will never happen again." That was the first time many of the students heard an adult say it out loud. The sheriff, meanwhile, was placed on administrative reassignment. He gave no statements, but rumors swirled that state officials were investigating use of force policies in schools, that his department was facing potential lawsuits, that someone had leaked his disciplinary record and it wasn't clean. One morning, a polished black SUV pulled into the school lot. Out stepped Secretary Eleanor Rames and Major Harding. They weren't there for a speech. They were there for a meeting. Rosa and Elijah sat with them in the principal's office. "We're offering Elijah a place in our Defense Future Scholars Program," Secretary Rames said. "It's new. He'll be the first." Elijah blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means mentors, tutoring, summer medical prep programs, early college access. It means we invest in you the way you've already chosen to invest in others." He nodded slowly. "Do I have to move?" The secretary smiled. "Not unless you want to." Major Harding leaned forward. "You've already shown more discipline and courage than most cadets 3 times your age. The rest? We can teach you." Elijah looked to his mom. She gave a single nod, her hand resting on his shoulder. "I'll do it," he said. "I want to help people. I still want to be a doctor." The days that followed weren't easy. Some in the town believed the sheriff had been humiliated unfairly. A few loud voices on local radio called it another attack on law enforcement. Others blamed woke politics. But most people, especially parents, spoke clearly. No one, no matter their title, should ever strike a child. Ever. At the next school board meeting, community members packed the auditorium. One after another, they stood to speak. "My son saw what happened. He's afraid now. We want to feel safe in school. This isn't just about one kid. It's about a culture." Elijah Morales showed more strength in that moment than most adults. "We should be protecting kids like him, not punishing them." Elijah didn't attend. He stayed home with Rosa, watching on a live stream. But his story had already rippled far beyond Brookridge. Letters poured in from veterans, from nurses, from other children who had been hurt or overlooked. One letter came from a boy in Minnesota who had been bullied for wearing a military-style backpack to school. Another from a woman in Texas who said her father had died waiting for a medic in combat. She wrote, "I hope you become the doctor my dad didn't have." Colleges reached out. So did national newspapers. A documentary filmmaker asked for an interview. But Elijah said no to most of it. He didn't want to become a symbol. He just wanted to study, to serve, to be seen. That spring, he received a personal invitation to tour Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. Major Harding accompanied him and Rosa. They walked through trauma bays, research labs, recovery wards. He met doctors who had performed surgeries on wounded soldiers in Afghanistan. He saw amputees learning to walk again. He asked more questions than anyone had time to answer. When he returned home, he hung a photo of himself and a surgeon in front of the military hospital on his bedroom wall, right beside the letter from Secretary Rames, and just below the frame Department of Defense pin. The school eventually renamed the Junior Cadet Scholarship Program in his honor. It's called the Morales Award now. And once a year, students gather in the same gym where it all happened. They wear those same pressed white shirts and maroon ties. But now, they're told a different story about honor, not the kind that demands silence, but the kind that speaks when it's hardest. At the end of each ceremony, someone reads the words Elijah wrote in his letter to the Secretary of Defense. I don't want to fight. I want to heal. I want to serve the people who get forgotten in the middle of everyone else's war. I want to wear a uniform, not for glory, but because I believe in saving lives when the world falls apart. And somewhere in the back of the room, a boy with quiet eyes and steady hands still sits, still watching, still dreaming. Not invisible anymore,